Liss, and the name of the program is The Way to Go. I invite you to join me each week at this time as we explore places to go and things to do. We're going on a very interesting exploration today. It's a series of trips in Westchester, sponsored by, of all people, the Bronx Historical Society. And my guest today is the man who is conducting these tours and many other tours. His name is Nestor Danyluk. He's a city planner in New York City. And we're going to find out what it's all about. And I suppose the first question, Nestor, is how come the Bronx Historical Society is sponsoring tours in Westchester?
Very good question. A number of people have asked that. And part of the thing is, if you look at the title of the series of tours, they're called the Annexation Tours. And this year marks the centennial. And part of it was almost an archaeological journey where we retraced the footsteps of the original road, which is surprisingly, a lot of it is still there.
It seems to me that in my conversations with you prior to our doing this show, that you find a lot of hidden things that people don't know about as you explore and get ready for these trips.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one thing to just pick up a little brochure or map. Usually I end up doing at least one dry run, and you'll find something that's tucked off on the side, a little monument or something that looks like it might have a story behind it. Very often after doing some research, you find that there are some fascinating stories. Mm-hmm. And I tried to bring that out during the tours. So in a sense, this is a cross between a hike and a historical walking tour. Usually on the historical walking tours, you'll have a short distance where you do a lot of standing and listening to history. And on hikes, you just keep moving. This tries to combine both, so there's a little bit of talking, a little bit of history, but also a great distance that's covered.
What was the subject of the second one in this series, in this fall series? The second tour?
As part of the annexation series? Well, after completing the Bronx River Parkway and the Bronx River, which was 4 segments, we resumed in Valhalla and continued from Valhalla to Tarrytown, by way of some of the cemeteries, which are tremendous treasure troves of history in and of themselves. And
I must interrupt you here and tell you that I once did on this program an interview with people from 2 of the cemeteries, Woodlawn and Kensico.
Yes.
About the maps that they have. And both of the people agreed that the name of this program was very appropriate for that program, The Way to Go. Well, sorry to interrupt you.
No, both of those places are absolutely incredible. And
so you went up through that area and into...
we resumed, we got onto the old right-of-way of the Putnam Division, which last saw passenger service, I guess, in the 1950s. And used that to get up through to the Rockefeller Estate in Pocantico Hills.
Now that Putnam Division roadway is that a biking and hiking path?
Most of it has been converted. The county is looking at other places where it's in the process of being converted to hiking and biking. There's still some stretches where it's non-continuous, but I've tried to incorporate as much of it into this series, so in fact you can do not a straight line, but pretty much a direct hike from the southernmost tip of the Bronx all the way to Peekskill.
Now you talked about the Rockefeller Estate. That's very interesting for several reasons. Why don't you talk about that, and I'll tell you what fascinated me about it.
Well, it's just an incredible place in the sense, I mean, you do have, of course, the mansion, which we don't go by, but we go through the rest of it, including the state park portion, the area where you still have some of the cattle ranches, and that was actually one of our crazier events in the sense that that horrendous storm that we had a number of weeks back, well, that's when we did the trip, and we had about 5 or 6 hardy souls that insisted on doing it, and the skies opened up. We took refuge in one of those cow barns, and we sat there for maybe a good, I'd say, hour and a half before it was safe enough to go back outside without getting drowned.
But wasn't some of the paths actually the family paths that they used for their carriages?
Yes, most of the land in that area consists of a lot of old carriage paths that go by some of the lakes, by again further down where you still have some of the cattle farms, which are outside of the state park area. But it's quite an incredible place in that here you are in central Westchester, and yet you come across a landscape that could very easily have been taken out of the last century, especially with the farm scenes. And it's quite an incredible place, and you exit that all of a sudden, and you find you're back in 1995.
You mentioned that you don't do the mansion. Of course, Kite is now open to the public, and we've talked about it on this program several times.
Yes,
I understand that they're sold out now through much of '96.
That unfortunately is why I can't. Getting a group together, you pretty much won't know until the last minute how many people you have. And with making way advanced reservations like that, it becomes a bit of a difficulty. But hopefully that'll encourage people to come back and visit the place.
There's so much, as I talk to you, and it just reinforces my feeling that there's so many wonderful, incredible, undiscovered for most people places in Westchester. And you've discovered them, and you're taking people on them, and we have to be thankful to the Bronx Historical Society for being the sponsor. Let's talk about some of the other trips that you've done this year.
Other than doing trips for Bronx Historical...
No, I'm talking about this series at the moment.
Oh, with this series?
Yeah.
Well, we will be continuing after Rockefeller. We resume with a little section of the Putnam Division, and that takes us up to the start of the Briarcliff-Peekskill Parkway.
Parkway. Is there a road on this parkway?
This one does not have a road. It was pretty much planned out around the same time as the Bronx Road Parkway system, maybe about 20 years later, and the road was going to be a crucial feature of it, and only about a mile and a half or so of roadway was built. And if you're familiar with Briarcliff Manor, Route 9A, that's basically the road. But the parkway itself continues pretty much on its original alignment up to Peekskill, past the Cornell Dam, and then up through Blue Mountain Reservation. And
it's hard for me when you say parkway, I think road, because it's become the same thing. But I've learned today that parkway has nothing to do with road, and there are parkways without roads, I suppose, everywhere.
That's right, and this one is a good 11 miles or so of unspoiled parkway, and it makes for really a wonderful trek. We break it up into two segments on this trip, and the last one, I believe, is on December 3rd.
Right, yeah. And where does that go?
Well, that will start at the Cornell Dam and go from there up to Peekskill, and that will conclude this, as I've called it, the coast-to-coast marathon, where we started on one coast, the Long Island Sound, and end up at the Hudson River coast.
So, Nestor, what do you find? There are many discoveries on this trip. Probably every time you go, you discover other things yourself. But certainly the people who come along with you on these tours, they see vistas from high points that they have never seen before. They discover things such as we're talking about today. There's a lot of discovery going on, isn't there?
Absolutely. It runs the range. It could be, anything like on this series, for example. It's been everything from urban redevelopment in the southern part of the Bronx, things that many people who went on the first part of the trip had this image of, this Hollywood image of, quote, Fort Apache. And we go through areas that maybe 20 years ago you wouldn't dare go through, and it's single-family homes and people living there and making an attempt to restore the community, and to a very large extent successfully restoring the community. We stopped by a few of the landmark churches in the area, a number of buildings that dated back that have been wonderfully restored, and it really was a very upbeat experience for many of the people that came on this leg not knowing what to expect and saw this tremendous rebirth.
You're into this now. Your day job, your real job, is a city planner, isn't it?
That's correct.
And what do you do as a city planner?
I do a lot of what's known as community liaison work, neighborhood planning, dealing with local community groups. Also working in an area called the Riverdale Natural Area, which is, I guess, New York City's attempt to ensure that one section that we have in the Bronx, which is incredibly green and just a wonderful collection of really beautiful landscapes and mansions, the purpose of the local laws, the local zoning, is to assure that will continue. So I work with developers, anybody that's planning to build in the area, and we pretty much try to maintain the natural topography, maintain the trees, which is very different than what most people imagine if somebody hears that you're a city planner in Bronx County, and you think of a highly urban area, and there are some incredible places in the Bronx that need to be kept green, and that's actually, I do some of my tours through there, but that's another...
I do want to remind our audience that talking today with Nestor Danyluk, who is conducting tours in conjunction with the Bronx Historical Society, current series in Westchester, but many other tours, and he also works with other organizations. So let's talk about some of the other tours that you've done.
Well, one of the groups that I'm active with is an organization called Fifth Avenue Hiking and Outing, which is based out of Manhattan. And what that really does is I try to take people to areas, primarily parks or natural areas, many of which are within New York City limits, which, again, when people see them, their whole idea of New York City gets challenged because they realize how green things can be. And
parks such as?
Well, we would go in the Bronx, for example, places like Pelham Bay Park, Van Cortlandt Park.
Isn't Pelham Bay Park the largest park in New York City?
Yes and no. It's an interesting situation. It's the largest city park with about 2,000 acres, maybe close to maybe 2.5 times the size of Central Park. The very largest park in the city would be the Gateway National Recreational Area, which is about 8,000 acres, but most of that is underwater. So you could have constant debates between...
That's out near Floyd Bennett Field in that area?
Yeah, everything from roughly from Sheepshead Bay out to the fringes of Kennedy Airport. There's a lot of, there's interesting things there, and that would be another place, for example, go through places like Fort Tilden in Queens, which, again, are really, you're way out on the beach, and it's an old military base that has been turned into part of Gateway, and quite a fascinating little area to poke around.
I mean, the question here is, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Now, did you become a city planner because of your interest in everything that goes on in the urban area, or were you interested and that's what brought you into this career?
Well, I remember dragging my grandfather out of the house when I was about 4 or 5 years old, saying, let's go that way, let's see what's there. And so I've been doing, exploration as far back as I can remember. And I guess what I do now in city planning, I see it kind of as a natural outgrowth of that, my interest in the...
your education took you in that direction, and...
pretty much. Looking at, I guess, the standard dilemma that high school students have, what am I going to do after graduation? I remember picking up a catalog once and leafing through various schools and various programs, and I saw this major at Fordham University that was called Urban Studies, and I'm like, good Lord, this sounds really fascinating, and well, the rest is history, I guess.
And then you went on and got your graduate degree.
Yes, then I got a graduate degree in planning and in public affairs, and continued on.
How do you develop these tours? I know that you said that you just don't do the tours. You go out and do them in advance and get a lot of information before you do them.
Right. Well, the first thing, especially since I try to get a historical perspective on many of these places, I'll do a little bit of research, then go out and basically do a field check to make sure that some of the things I'm talking about are there, that I know exactly where, and that nothing unexpected comes up. For example, I had one unfortunate experience about a year ago or so when I was doing a Croton Aqueduct series where I had pre-checked the trip, but it was 2 months before the trip, and when we got to this one crucial location where we had to cross the Croton River, well, it seems the bridge that was there 2 months ago was no longer there, by Quaker Bridge. And luckily it was a Saturday and there was frequent bus service nearby, so we continued on for another 2 miles and hopped on a bus and survived that. But since then I've learned my lesson. If you do a pre-check, it even can't be a month or two before. It has to be about a week before.
Do you come across odd facts in your research, and how do you do your research? How do you decide where you're going to go, and how do you decide what the interesting things are? You just don't go out there and hope that you're going to find something.
Well, some of it involves digging up maybe some old guidebooks, something like the WPA guide from the 30s, and
A marvelous book for people who
Yes,
haven't
probably
read.
one of the best guidebooks ever written to New York City.
And elsewhere. I've read other WPA guidebooks in other cities, and they're just great.
And there's a lot of things that you'll find there that are pretty much hidden now or forgotten about, or monuments or places that might have been on the tourist itinerary and have kind of become forgotten. And, as an example, Staten Island is a place that few people visit other than setting foot on the ground after coming over on the ferry and then popping back and going back to Manhattan. But the island itself is about two and a half times the size of Manhattan. And there's quite a lot of incredible neighborhoods that are there that have really some tremendous histories. And there's also a lot of green space, a lot of parks. You could walk around there and get completely lost in the sense that you're not going to see any signs of civilization. You'll just see trees and valleys and lakes and what have you. So I'll try to combine a number of the historic neighborhoods and
some wonderful museums.
Yes.
And some wonderful buildings.
Absolutely. And take a little of each. Do maybe 3 or 4 miles of really heavy-duty nature walking, and visit something, let's say like the Tibetan Museum, or go up through Sailor Snug Harbor.
Two wonderful places. The time I visited the Tibetan Museum, there was a man there, an attendant, who was from Tibet and could relate to a lot of the things that you were seeing in a wonderful, wonderful way. It's not very popular. There aren't that many people there. That means that you really can get personal attention when you go there.
It's just a classic little neighborhood museum, although the scope of their collection is really
incredible.
It's wonderful. And then there are other things. There's not too far away is a house designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, which again very few people realize that there's a real residential building. Everybody flocks up to Chicago to look at the Frank Lloyd Wright houses. Well, we have one right here.
Then, of course, in Westchester, we've got Usonia, which may not all be Wright designed, but they're certainly inspired by Wright, and of course he was involved with it at the time, and that's close by.
We come across...
The trouble with Usonia is that the best time to go is after the leaves are off the trees, because you can't see the buildings in the summertime.
Yes, that's actually another thing that people don't realize. The things that I do with Fifth Avenue, for example, a lot of the hikes go all year, and sometimes the best time to really get out is in the middle of winter, when you don't have, when you could really see right through all the trees and into people's houses, things of that sort.
There are some wonderful books that have been written and are being written on walking tours in this area. And over the next few weeks, I will be interviewing some of the authors of those books, culminating with the author of the wonderful New York Encyclopedia, which has just come out. And it's interesting to me that all of these books have different information. They have unearthed things, their approaches are different, and they have unearthed information that the other book doesn't have. And there's so much to see, there's so much to explore, as you certainly are pointing out here. And it's just wonderful that you take people into these places. Do you plan far in advance? You've been doing tours now for some time.
Yeah, usually the calendar is set about 6 months in advance, and that gives me enough time to go out and research and prepare. And as you were saying, that's the key thing. You can't just rely on one source. You go through, and sometimes you'll find a cryptic little reference in one book, and it'll be really elaborated, or sometimes you just have to go and pull the newspaper from that period. A few weeks back, I led a tour that included Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. And
I've been there 3 or 4 times, because every tour is different.
Incredible place. And one of the things there that comes right out of that, I was using some material that had information, and I'm walking along and I see this little monument to Philip Hone, who of course is a very famous New York name, early mayor, diarist, and things of that sort. And I'm wondering, God, this isn't in any of the books. There has to be a story behind this. So I started doing research, pulled out the old newspapers, and it turns out that this was the grandson of the Philip Hone who had vanished. He was like the Judge Crater of 1895. Went out was with his wife in a drugstore, bought a soda, went outside, never to be seen again. And for the next 2 or 3 months, about 4 or 5 times the newspapers would always write articles about Mr. Hone has been sighted in New Jersey. A body was discovered in the mountains
Sounds
of
like
West
Judge
Orange.
Crater.
Exactly. Is this Mr. Hone? No, it wasn't. Well, there was a sighting in Denver. There was a sighting here. And for a good 3 months, that was the big question to his, has anybody seen Philip Hone? And unfortunately, 4 months later, he was found in the Hudson River. But that was just, pure luck. I just happened to come across something that looked like it had a story. And
that's wonderful. I'm sure that people who go on your tours are interested in a lot of these anecdotal things that you come up with. I know that a good tour guide always has this little anecdote, this little bit of information that tickles the imagination and amuses people or whatever.
That's part of the secret. You have to come up with a few good stories as well as giving the underlying historical base and hopefully get people to see, say, New York. In the case of doing the area by Greenwood, what I try to do is pretty much give people a feel for what life was like in the 1800s. And we go into the adjoining neighborhoods and walk through some of the Victorian areas, such as Prospect Park South, which is these wonderful old mansions dating back to the 1800s, and then go through Park Slope. So you kind of get the whole feel for everything that was going on.
When I did the interview on the cemeteries, which we mentioned earlier, I noted that Danny Kaye, his tombstone is a bench.
Yes.
And it has certain things which represent his aviation, the other things he was interested in. I mentioned this to Martin Gottfried, who's a drama critic, who had written a book on Danny Kaye, and I told him that, and he said, but he was cremated. So now that brings up a question: is he buried there? Are his ashes there? Or is it just a memorial to him? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, that's, you get into a lot of stories like that. One of the things that I had heard once on a related note in Woodlawn, the grave of Damon Runyon, apparently the story was that he wanted to be buried over Broadway. So there's a monument there, but the story that I heard was that he got his good old friend, the great Eddie Rickenbacker, to simply go up in a small plane and do the honors over Times Square.
I do want to give the telephone number that people can contact you for the December 3rd tour or any other tour. So what is that number?
Well, I could be reached at area code 718-364-6445.
And I'm going to put that telephone number up in the closing credits so we can get that. And so people can call you not only for this one tour, but tours that you're doing all year round.
There's usually a message on the machine that'll tell what's on or what's in advance, and give a call, and I could just tell people in greater detail what types of activities will be taking place, and sign up that way.
It sounds like it's really fascinating, and I certainly am glad that you were able to come here, and I appreciate that you're giving us all this information. My guest today has been Nestor Danyluk, and Nestor Danyluk has been conducting tours for the Bronx Historical Society and for other organizations, and it's great tours, great ways to find out in Westchester and what's happening elsewhere. I'm Norman Liss. The name of the program is The Way to Go, and until next week at the same time, enjoy yourself.